It is good to be with you. We begin tonight with New Mexico, where thousands of firefighters are battling a colossal wildfire, now the largest in state history. Part of the blaze was caused by spot fires from a prescribed or intentional burn, but it's also fueled by abnormally warm, windy, and dry weather. The fire has destroyed hundreds of buildings and forced thousands of evacuations. A historic drought, the worst in over a millennium, coupled with climate change, has led to longer and more destructive wildfires across the West. And this is all happening as rising housing prices are pushing people further into fire-prone areas at the edges of wildlands. For more on this, I spoke with Michael Mann. He's a professor of atmospheric science at Penn State University and the author of The New Climate War: The Fight to Take Back Our Planet. We started by talking about what accounts for the scale of the New Mexico wildfire.
This is a tragedy that we're seeing play out. You know, it doesn't really matter much what starts these fires, whether it's a prescribed burn, whether it's a lightning strike. What determines the scale, how fast they spread, how wide they spread, how hot they burn, how much damage they do, ultimately is a function of how much fuel there is, how much sort of dry wood and other material that's available to catch on fire. And that is a function of how dry the climate is. So we are seeing record levels of drought over a large part of the western U.S. year after year. Right now, a substantial part of the western U.S. is in either extreme or exceptional drought. So you take that extreme drought, you combine it with that heat, the warming that we're seeing, and you get these unprecedented wildfires that we've seen play out in California, Colorado, Arizona, New Mexico, Oregon, Washington, parts of Canada in recent years. It's not rocket science. You combine the heat and the drought, you get these sorts of devastating wildfires.
Well, what should be done about it, given the exceptional drought across parts of the western U.S.?
Well, you know, ultimately, the only way to prevent all of this from getting worse, from it getting drier and hotter and seeing even more widespread, even more destructive and more deadly wildfires, is to solve the problem, at its core, which is our ongoing burning of fossil fuels and the increased carbon pollution in the atmosphere that is warming up the climate. There are things that we can do to try to increase our resilience, move away from especially wildfire-prone regions, taking adaptive measures to try to cope with the increased risk that we're now seeing. But ultimately, we are stuck with that. We are stuck with these levels of elevated risk that we're going to have to deal with. And if we don't stop warming up the planet through carbon pollution, it will get worse and worse.
I'm struck by the connection between housing policy and climate policy. Given that housing is so unaffordable across so many parts of the country, to include the West, you have people moving further and further out into these wildfire zones. How should we rethink housing policy in ways that are sort of climate responsible?
As many as 1,000 homes are likely to be lost in this wildfire. We need to ultimately move away from those increasingly risk-prone areas, and we need, policies that incentivize that. Ultimately, folks who live in these sorts of regions are going to find it more and more difficult to get insurance, to get home insurance. And as I've said before, uninsurability is sort of the first step along that path to uninhabitability, and that's what we're coping with now.
Given the vast amount of writing and research you've done on this topic, how do you guard against climate defeatism, this sense that this problem is so vast, it's so complicated? It oftentimes seems like there's not a whole lot that we can do about it. How do you advise people against that?
There is something that we can do. We can get off fossil fuels. And the science here, in a sense, is encouraging. The science over the last decade or so has shown us that if we stop putting carbon pollution into the atmosphere, if we stop, with these ongoing carbon emissions, then the warming stabilizes fairly quickly. So there is an immediate and direct impact of our efforts to decarbonize. We can prevent warming from crossing certain catastrophic thresholds like 1.5 degrees Celsius, 3 degrees Fahrenheit warming, where we will start to see some of the worst impacts of climate change. There's still time to do that, but there is agency. We can still do it, but there is urgency. We have to reduce global carbon emissions by 50% within the next decade if we are to keep warming below that catastrophic level. And that's going to require policy. That's going to require politicians who are willing to support climate-friendly policies. And that means us voting for those politicians who will act on our behalf rather than acting as rubber stamps for polluters.
Agency and urgency. Michael Mann, thanks again for your time and for your insights. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Always a pleasure, Jeff.